Okay, so the last type of special inequality that we're going to talk about this week is going to be absolute value inequalities. And so there are going to be two separate inequalities. Just like we made two equations when we dealt with absolute value equations, it's going to be the same situation with inequalities. We're going to have to split it into two because of that positive negative number inside of the absolute value bars. It's still making this a true statement. So the way we split this is going to be x is greater than or equal to 5. That's the original. And also x is less than or equal to negative 5. So you notice that we flipped the sign here and we changed the positive to a negative. So we flipped the inequality sign and we also flipped the sign of the number. And so then we would just graph that. So at 5, which is here, we're going to go greater than that. And then at negative 5, still closed circle because we have the equal to, we're going to go less than that. And then we write that in interval notation. Notice that they go away from each other, away. So we're going to be doing this as an OR. So we're going to go from negative infinity to negative 5, or from 5 to positive infinity. Okay? So anytime you have a greater than symbol, that's what it's going to look like. Down here, if you have a less than symbol, we would write it as x is less than or equal to 8, and then we would flip it. X is greater than or equal to negative 8. And so when we start to graph that negative 8, we're going to be moving to the right because it's greater than that. And at the 8, we're going to be moving to the left. So you'll notice that this is an and, that these two things are going to graph together when we graph them. And so we go from negative 8 to positive 8. Okay? So what we notice here is that absolute value inequalities are really just compound inequalities, which we covered last week. Okay, and so what happens is less than are and compound inequalities, and if you have a greater than symbol, you're going to have an or. So up here, notice it was a greater than, so it went away from each other, graphed away from each other. Down here we had a less than, so it was an and. All right. So that's the number one thing that we'll need to remember about absolute value. If it's less than, it's going to be and. If it's greater than, it's going to be or. And there are 4 steps to solving these. The first one is to isolate the absolute value, just like with an equation. The second step is to create the two cases, okay? And this is where it's a little bit different. In the last one, you just set it equal to the negative of that number. But this time we do need to also switch the sign as well. So you keep it, you switch the sign, and then you switch the sign of this number, okay? So keep it, switch, the KISS method. Third step is to solve. And the fourth step is to graph and write it in interval notation. So we're going to do an example of this. So we start off with x is less than 7. So first thing, it's less than. So less than means that we're going to be dealing with an and. Okay. So we're going to isolate it. It's already isolated. Step 2, we're going to create the 2. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to keep the original. Okay, x is less than 7. The second, we're going to keep the variable. We're going to switch the sign to the other direction, and we're going to switch the sign of this number. Okay, and so that's what we end up with. They've already been solved, so now we just need to graph. So we have less than 7, so we're going to be going to the left, and then greater than negative 7, so we're going to be going here in the middle. And it's an and, so that's right, it should be graphing together. And so we go from negative 7 to 7 in our interval notation. Okay, so that's just kind of the basics of graphing them. Now we're going to do a few examples where we actually do some solving. All right, so first step, we're going to go ahead and skip down. Number 2 is going to be very similar to number 1, so just keep that in mind. On number 3, we have a greater than symbol. So greater than means that we're going to be dealing with an or. All right, so keep that in mind. First step, we're going to be isolating the absolute value expression. Okay, it's already isolated. Notice it's by itself on this side of the inequality. Second step is to create the two cases. So this one stays the same. The second one, we keep what's on the left, we switch the sign, and then we switch that to a -6. All right. Third step is to solve them both. So to solve, we're just going to add 1. So x is greater than 7. Add 1. X is less than -5. Okay, so notice that it's not always just going to be the same two numbers, just in opposites. Sometimes you will have different numbers, just like the equation, so this is not too terribly different from dealing with absolute value equations. So now we just need to graph it. So remember, we're graphing OR, so they should graph away from each other. So we'll start with 7, and greater than that, we go to the right. And then -5, we're going to the left, less than that. All right, and so now we're going to do our interval notation. From -infinity to -5, close that, or from 7 to infinity. Okay, notice I have parentheses on all of those because these are open circles and infinities. Okay, all right, so that's a couple of examples of these. So I'm going to pause and I'm going to do another couple of examples on the back side of this and then give you instructions for what you need to complete for the day. Okay, so go ahead and head on to the next video.